Hello, listeners. This is the Ecom Edge podcast brought to you by Coveo, the first e-commerce podcast focusing exclusively on how enterprise brands and teams like yours can be smarter with data, technology, and resources to get an edge. I'm your host, Sergio Iacobucci, the Director of E-commerce Marketing at Coveo, and as always, you can expect today's conversation to bring you new approaches and tools for e-commerce growth and profitability. Genuinely very excited about today's guest, Nick White. Nick and I have actually worked together in the past, and he's a true leader in the world of e-commerce. Nick's e-commerce pedigree is hard to match, so get ready for this kind of intro to Nick. So he's been the head of marketing at John Lewis. He's led online direct to customer at Waitrose, so two very big UK brands. Then he moved into the world of travel, where he was the digital director at Thomas Cook Airlines, which is one of the most competitive markets there is. We could even touch on that a little bit later. And more recently, he's gone back into retail, working for Samsung in their direct-to-consumer business. So now I need to take a quick breath after going through all of that. And so today we're going to discuss Nick's observations on e-commerce over the years, how to set up a D2C strategy, what metrics you need to be tracking, the tech to use, and how to set up the right team, which is largely the most important part to keep the key to success. So let's get stuck in, Nick. It's great to have you on. Really excited to go through all of this with you. You know this space so well. So let's kick it off with, what changes have you observed in e-commerce over the years?
Well, hi, Sergio. Good to see you again. And you make me sound very old, which I probably am. So, thanks for that. So, that's a great question. To be honest, we could spend the whole podcast talking about that. I think, and what's interesting, I've worked in UK, European, and I'm working in the Southern Hemisphere, and the adoption of e-commerce is very different globally, which we may want to touch on. But I think let's just talk about UK. The main thing is that I guess the consumer adoption is much higher than when I first got into the space 15, 17 years ago. And expectations are much higher. There's a lot more competition out there. So, I bought a present for my wife yesterday from some small startup subscription business who probably 15 years ago couldn't afford to get into the market. So there's a lot more technology and things like Shopify. So allow people to get in there. I think importantly, there's a lot more talent in the market. Which is good and bad if you're in my role, I guess. But there's a lot more people out there who, when I started, you mentioned digital, and most people went into a panic. And clearly it's much more mainstream. So I think it's changed massively. I think just quickly on the Southern Hemisphere I'm working at the moment, actually it's nowhere near as mature as the UK. So, we take for granted, next day delivery from 8 o'clock tonight. In places like Australia, you're kind of 3, 4, 5 days, and in Asian markets, even more than that. So the adoption is still quite variable across the world, but certainly UK, it's well known and well adopted, and high expectations from our consumers. So
yeah, definitely. I think you can. In the past, if I remember correctly, the UK used to track a little bit ahead of the US, for instance. I think now things have evened out a little bit more, where the adoption is pretty much the same. What you just touched on, sort of like the expectation of the customer. What do you think's changed in terms of their expectation compared to, let's say, I don't know, 5+ years ago?
I think it's I know it's buzzwords, but it used to be multi-channel, but now omni-channel, whatever the latest is. But expectations are very high in terms of speed of delivery, convenience of that delivery, whether you want to pick it up in store, return it in store, return it to another third party. The expectations are really high. I think social media has made a massive change. So, I had a terrible experience on my holiday on Saturday from an airline. I won't name them, but I tweeted straight away and expect the call center teams to respond in 5 minutes to my tweet. And actually, to be fair to them, they did. So I think there's that's changed massively in terms of the instantaneous expectations of consumers and the kind of impatience. I'd say the other kind of two key areas are people are a lot less loyal because, as I said at the start, there's so many more people. If you're looking for kind of fashion, there's so many people out there. And friends of mine have started their own little fashion businesses, and it's so competitive, and you've got to be on top of your game. And I think the other key thing is actually, and it's actually a chart that I think it was a Tesco chart I saw when I first started at Waitrose, is that is that people come for the offer and stayed for the service, and this was grocery at the time. But I think those principles still stand. Is that you've got to. Yeah, it's good to have a promotion or an offer or whatever it might be, but if you don't get the post-purchase experience right, people move very quickly. So kind of that stuff is so critical, and it's changing all the time.
I couldn't agree more. And I everything you just mentioned, if you think about it from, the business perspective, it's all things that incur largely additional cost, right? Like, being able to kind of ship it wherever they want or pick it up in store, hopefully pick up in store is a bit cheaper, but sometimes brands still have to ship that to the store. It's not necessarily in stock there already, or returning via a third party. Obviously, they're going to take a cut there. But then also thinking beyond the offer, like you said, how do you make sure that you get that person to come back and make 1, 2, 3 more purchases? Requires kind of a team or some people to really think about that and put that into practice properly. And I think we'll probably get into that in a bit more detail later on. We're kind of going to talk about a little bit more maybe about expectations in a bit as well, but we also want to talk about direct to consumer. Direct to consumer has seen a huge boom in recent years, and there's a lot that a business can get wrong with that, I think, or they can get it really, really right. But it'd be interesting to hear, in your experience, what's the most common mistakes you've seen brands make when it comes to their e-commerce and D2C strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, do you actually want to get into D2C? And I think going back to the fundamentals you've just touched on, I think is key is, can you make money? And ultimately, I remember one of my bosses said to me many years ago, I think it was at Waitrose, when we were looking to build out our kind of non-food strategy, you've either got to have a high AOV or a high gross margin. And if you're not, because the cost base is so high, and we'll talk about that more, if you haven't got a product that's going to sell at 200, 300, 400, £500, or you've got a margin that's 40, 50%, you're going to really struggle to make money. So I think that's important, first of all. Do you actually want to get in and do it yourself rather than let somebody else do it for you? I think secondly is, I think you've got to have a really balanced channel strategy. It's really important to have, it could be on the marketplace as well as D2C, as well as through your kind of retailers or your channel partners. So you've got to have a balanced strategy. But I think if your margins are there and you can make some money, I always think what's key, and what I guess the journey I was on at Samsung when I started, you've got to get a good spine. And I think you've got to get the right talent in the right roles. And for me, that is, you've got to have the right traffic sources. You've got to get your affiliate and paid search, because it makes up huge amounts of your sales. Maybe we'll talk about platforms separately. And then I'm a big advocate on free delivery, free next day delivery. And it's interesting that a lot of retailers are pulling back from that. But I'm still adamant that, if you look at your value chain of where you want to invest your margin, having that free delivery proposition is so key. Because I still think people, when I watch my wife shop, she gets charged £5, she will switch off a brand and not go there. And so I think that's really important. And clearly then you've got to have a good warehouse logistics and fulfillment partner to do that. But I think you've got to have the core spine. I think the other key thing is you've got to tailor your strategy to the culture you're working in. So if I look at the John Lewis partnership, will probably take a longer term view, but Samsung are very short term, classic PLC, and therefore you probably can't afford 2 years to go and build an enterprise e-commerce solution because you just haven't got the time to do that. So when I launched into Ireland, for example, we used a Shopify-like platform, and we were live in 8 weeks, and that was our entry into market. In the UK, we'd outsourced it to a third party. So you kind of, I think that's the other thing, is now you've got to adopt your investment and your platform strategy based on the culture you're working within. So I think that's it. So can you make money? What's your channel strategy, and how does it fit against your other channels? And then looking at your core spine of the consumer fundamentals, and then build your platform strategy based on your culture. I'd say those are some of the key things, and obviously have great people.
That's great, and I think we would probably talk a little bit about people some more later. But you said something around free delivery. What do you think about free returns?
I think it's really important.
Okay.
Funny enough, I'm doing some work at the moment, and I got a great chart from, I think it was McKinsey, that basically said something like 27% of consumers wouldn't come back if your returns experience wasn't top notch. And so I think that boils down to not just is it free, but is it, so for example, we've had a discussion around, kind of what do you allow consumers to return? And so, kind of some brands will say, look, up to 100 days, try before you buy. Other brands will say you've got 14 days, and as soon as the box open, we're not taking it. So I think the proposition is key. And then, yes, ideally it's free if you can afford it. It's back to this value chain investment. And I think the other key thing that, our call center goes into meltdown if we don't have the process to get people their money back quickly as well, because that's the other. And I bought from a brand in an unnamed brand, and it's 3 weeks now since I returned. I still haven't got my money. So that's going to trigger a contact, and it's going to drive costs up in the call center and social, whatever. So I don't think it's just free. It's the overall returns proposition, but I think it's fundamental.
Yeah. And I suppose you're kind of touching on there, like, just looking after the customer in a moment where they could create a negative association with the brand, right? Like it's not, the return could be because they want another one, it's just broken or whatever, but it could be a return, unfortunately, because they don't want the product anymore. But either way, you don't want to leave a bad taste in that customer's mouth. You want to make sure that they're willing to come back at some point if the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah, and I think maybe just, sorry to interrupt you, I think that's one of the, back to your first question in the podcast, that's one of the things I've seen massively change. So, in the last few days, I've gone into my local convenience store to return a UPS parcel. I went into a well-known high street retailer to return something else, and they went to me, sorry, I don't know anything about this. So I went to that retailer's shop to return it, and they went, oh, sorry, there's a queue of 30 people. And so that you can return it in so many different places, whether it's the post office or a retailer or direct. There's so many different places. And again, I've had such a bad experience, I'll never shop at that brand again. So, I think, it's the full, we'll come on to it more, but it's the full experience is so critical.
I agree. It's interesting, though, because I know, this is probably more happening in the fast fashion sense. And I have mixed views on returns because, I've seen that Boohoo, and I can't remember the other brand, started charging, I think it was like £1.50 for a return. Mm-hmm. Now, I have mixed views about it because I quite like the idea of putting people off purchasing loads of stuff, knowing that they're going to return a load of it. But that's purely me coming at it from a sustainability angle of, I know a lot of that fast fashion stuff, when it gets returned because it's so cheap, ends up in landfill. So, that's my side of it being like, maybe that's a good thing. But I think when you're talking high ticket items where there's a lot of potential customer lifetime value, you do need to offer the right kind of service. And I love that idea of like thinking about where you're going to, invest in your value chain, like where are you willing to take a bit of a hit because it's worth it. I've never heard that before, so I think that's great. Because part of the CRM strategy is around data, because sometimes a brand has loads of data on customers but doesn't really have a way to activate them, and sort of D2C can be a way to start to activate some of that data. How does sort of like CRM data play into your D2C strategy and, thinking about activating some of that data to, I don't know, make a personalized experience or just make something that's a bit smoother? What's the play there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's clearly one of the key reasons you get into D2C. So when I started at Samsung, you can imagine Samsung's got huge amounts of data. Most of it I'm not allowed to see for data protection reasons. But we had a big database, but effectively it was deep and not wide in a crude sense. So I didn't know little about it. All the relationships were held with our channel partners. So I guess the world of CRM, one of my first marketing jobs was CRM at the Daily Telegraph, and that was customer data. Now look with spam and all that kind of stuff, the use of email is really dying, and the value that we get from email in terms of sales is minimal. So the big change is how you fuse your cookie data, your digital data with your customer data, and try and create a single view. But the data team I had in my UK role, we spent a huge amount of time trying to pin that all together, and we use the Samsung account as the kind of the common denominator. But I think the change, from, if I look at kind of the CRM programs of old, when you do Welcome and whatever else, now we share that data with, not literally share it, but Google and Facebook will ingest that data to help us with personalization on search ad copy. We use that on site. So we have a on-site personalization tool, and that allows us to, you could be on the homepage or a product page, and we offer you a discount because of your birthday, and that can be played through on paid search or on a paid social ad. So that data is getting it in one place, and then using that to kind of personalize across multiple platforms. But clearly, the other thing is to understand customer value. And if I don't know anything about you, I can't do anything about it. But if you're one of my top customers who are buying X products per year, then clearly I'd rather know about that, and I can dress my strategy accordingly. So, yeah. So I think it's absolutely fundamental as to why you go into DTC, but it's quite easy to say. It's quite difficult to stitch all the disparate data pots together to get that kind of holistic view.
Yeah, definitely. That's the essentially single customer view projects that we're kicking off 6-7 years ago, I guess, is when I feel like it happened the most, and people were there, but in those projects for multiple years trying to get everything right, because it is just genuinely a very difficult task to get all of that data right. And you've got people who shop from the same household, sometimes share the same email, but they are actually different people, and it's a minefield of data. But once you get it right, and I think you've got the foundation there, then you can start to activate it. That's key. You said, about, if you've got someone that's spending a lot of money, essentially a high lifetime value customer or a VIP or whatever you want to call them, you probably want to give them a slightly different proposition. And I wanted to ask about that. How do you define the customer proposition? Because I feel like that's core to a go-to-market. And you can try and sometimes do that around the product that you're selling or the service that you're selling. But what else can you do to try and differentiate yourself in a market? Samsung versus LG. How do you do that?
Yeah. I think again, it depends on which market. And again, I don't know where your listeners are, but I'm working with our Australian team at the moment, and again, I started off saying about service, and what's interesting in that part of the world is, service is a massive differentiator if you can get it right. So what you might take for granted in the UK, as I said, you kind of free next day delivery with an 8 p.m. cutoff. In Australia, you can't do that. So, but what we're trying to figure out is how you create a kind of UK-like proposition in Australia, because that becomes a massive differentiator in terms of your service proposition. I think the other, so in D2C, I guess the kind of elephant in the room is price. Yeah. So when you're entering into D2C, you can't really differentiate on price, because what you don't want to do is undercut the market. So that, kind of your price is a hygiene factor. So I think the differentiator becomes things like how you reward your customers for shopping with you and that kind of stuff. I think financial services has been a big change in that over the years, in terms of the kind of the Klarnas and the PayPals and the sophistication of that. I think Samsung in the UK launched their own financial services business in Q4 in the UK. I can't really go into too much detail, but that's something really interesting in terms of how you can control and you can build your own products. Because things like subscription businesses and all this kind of where the market's going, that's an interesting opportunity, I think, for brands to have their own. I know lots of brands do it, but you can then define your own product roadmap. So how you can differentiate ways to pay. Things like trade-in are really big in consumer electronics. So people trade in huge numbers of products. So you offer kind of good enhanced values to kind of trade in your old products. So I think there's a number of things. But I always try and look at the market, maturity of the different parts, and it depends which way you're trading. So things you might take, as I said, you might take for granted in the UK might be a big differentiator in another market. So I think it's looking at the data and looking at the kind of the competitor landscape, and then working out where you think you can differentiate and still make some profit,
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting you say that, because I recently bought sort of like the next phone from my old phone. It's a Google phone, and the trade-in they offered me was much higher than what anyone else would offer. Obviously on purpose, and it made me buy the next phone because it made it feel like an even better deal for me. So now I was debating whether I should go to iPhone or not, and it kind of just kept me there, because I was like, just feels like a great deal for me. They had another offer on at the same time, and I was like, yeah, I'll stick with it, and it does work. And I didn't know that does that happen outside of phones? Like, do people do trade-ins
watches, tablets.
Okay,
yeah. And I think back to your point earlier about CSR, I think it's an opportunity for most brands. When I say most brands, quite a lot of brands, there may not be, whether there's a residual value in the market for that particular product, but you can own the supply chain post return. And certainly we see, and I'm sure like most brands see, the younger demographic, the Gen Gs and stuff like that, kind of much more passionate, and that's a differentiator. So offering trade-in and then saying, look, Gen Z, did I say Gen G? Gen Z, offering that as as a kind of owning the post-purchase, what happens to the product, and we'll look after it and make sure it's recycled or whatever it might be. I think that's a good area as well. But I think that whole kind of trade-in of a product. But if you think if you're buying a £2,000 product and you've got an existing one that's worth £1,000, and then you're buying your £1,000 left on a finance offer over 4 years, something becomes £2,000 is suddenly only £20 a month. So being creative with your finances, and clearly we don't want to encourage bad debt and all that kind of stuff. And there's some stuff in the press about that. But suddenly being creative about how you can drive affordability, I think is an interesting area.
Yeah, and especially at the moment. And how do you get across these differentiators? Might be really simple, but in a digital setting, because you haven't got someone there to say, there's this and this and this that we can give you to kind of help, you buy this product and this is the service that we offer. For e-commerce businesses, how do they get those value propositions across?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think, what I've always tried to do, and a lot of brands do it, is that kind of that banner that's consistent across the homepage and whatever else, is what are your 4 key USPs? Is it free delivery? Is it your price matching? Is it you've got free returns? Is it you've got lots of ways to pay? What are your 4 key levers? And then, bring out your customer journey map and say, right, am I really consistent on banners on the home site, on my CRM, on my call center, on a call waiting messaging, and just be really simple and consistent. And then, if you're doing advertising, is it consistent across there? Some brands like a strapline, don't they? So just kind of pick out your key ones that you think you differentiate. But I think the data allows you to personalize as well. So you can look at the type of customer you're bringing in, and if you're trying to switch a customer from another brand, so we will use our data to personalize messaging. So if I'm trying to get, I'm making up now, trying to get somebody from Apple to switch to Samsung, they would probably have a different need from an existing Samsung customer or whatever it might be, So you can personalize your kind of key levers based on the kind of human need.
Yeah, exactly. And, we said we touch on, building teams out and setting up the structures for this, because yes, you can have, the data there, you can have the tech there. My opinion of it always is that those two are fundamental, yes, but actually the people really bring these things to life, and a good leader brings these strategies to life. In your experience, what's the best way to set up a D2C team? Or is there, maybe there's not a best way, maybe there's multiple ways, but what do you think when it comes to the right people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first thing is I've worked in every business has a different approach to headcount. Some brands are happy with a high FTE kind of base, and other ones aren't. So you've got to look at what's your kind of, what's the context before you build your team. Then you will look at insourcing and outsourcing. And things like analytics, it's very difficult to get it's a highly sought after area. And having been able to recruit a team of great analysts in-house is quite tricky. So I've always had a mixture of kind of in-sourced, but then outsourced a lot of it. I think, when I started at Samsung, we were doing very small numbers and probably 1% of turnover. And I go back to, you've got to have the core spine that makes you successful initially or grows your business. So you've got to get the right talent in those roles. So the paid media activity, somebody who knows what they're doing on post-purchase and can sort out the logistics. Obviously, depends on your platform strategy, whether it's in-house or it's enterprise, whatever. But and then you've got to get somebody who's on top of the stock forecast and stuff like that, to make sure you've got stock and stuff to sell. So I like to kind of focus on getting the core spine, and then really looking at the talent in the market and say, can I insource or outsource that? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's generally where I try and start.
Well, I can repeat back to you kind of like what I kind of think I got from that in terms of people. I think analytics, so that someone could look at the data and hopefully draw some insight from it and do reporting for the team. Somebody in charge of inventory in some way, if that's, I guess, do you mean by warehouse inventory, or like just making sure there's enough throughput so you can meet demand?
Well, you need both. I mean, I think forget post-purchase for now, you've got to have somebody who's looking after your stock and forecasting. Yeah. But certainly if we're talking D2C, most brands, manufacturers will have 15, 20 different channels they want to sell through, and somebody's controlling that. And you've got to make sure when you're in early stage growth, it's very difficult to forecast. Come Black Friday might have grown, since I was Samsung grow 50-fold, and it's very difficult to forecast that accurately. So you've got to make sure you're on top of your forecast. So you've got enough, because you don't want to, if you're running a three-week Black Friday campaign, you don't want to run out of stock on day 2. So having somebody who's looking after your stock and forecasting, but then post-purchase, clearly you need somebody who's run an e-commerce warehouse and knows how to look after all that stuff post-purchase and everything that comes with it.
Of course. Yeah. And then obviously lastly was kind of that marketing acquisition person. Yeah. So you mentioned you've got that in. You mentioned, would you have someone in charge of the attribution side of things, or would you just kind of manage that with the partner directly?
I probably wouldn't worry about attribution on day one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess every brand's in a different place in terms of their data. But I think first of all, you've got to get some basic reporting set up, so you understand what channels are driving what traffic and conversion, and what's some basic user journeys on your site, so you understand what your bounce rates are, and which pages aren't performing, and you've got a problem at checkout, whatever it means. So I would probably start with the core fundamentals of basic reporting insight, and then you're right. Then as you get bigger and more sophisticated, and you look at attribution and stuff like that. But yeah, you've got to have, I mean, like you said just now, some brands can take years and years. So you need a kind of a phased approach to how you sort your data out and your insight.
And I just got my A's mixed up. When I said attribution, I meant affiliates.
I was going to say, that makes sense. Yeah. So I would definitely 100%. Yeah. I mean, I mean, affiliates, that's grown massively. I mean, we've had some really great people, and up to 40% of sales can come through affiliates. And I think the big thing I've seen in affiliates is not just B2C, but we call it EPP, but it's employment portal programs. So, it's there's a lot. I think I've seen a lot of private equity investment, things like Blue Light Card, kind of the student sites, and then all these employment programs like Reward Gateway and stuff like that. We do big volumes through those, and they've really grown a lot. So I think that channel is low cost for acquisition, high volumes. Yeah, definitely get an expert all over that. I definitely would do that.
You just reminded me that actually we bought our Samsung TV through my wife's portal through work.
There you go.
There you go. It does work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And what about the culture within that team? Because like the people obviously make up part of that culture, because you hopefully hire people that share the same values and want to grow and have the ambition to do X, Y, Z if it's in its growth stage. But how do you instill the culture and get it right?
Well, that's a big question. I think every business has a different culture, and every business has a different level of maturity for their digital business. And I think the first thing you've got to be really clear on recruiting the right people to work with the right culture, and because if it's a very, very fast moving, very commercial culture, you've got to get people in who, yes, they are technically excellent, but the behaviourally can cope with that. So I think that's the key thing, and is to have the right recruitment strategy, and and make sure that you get, as I said, you get people who are technically good, but also are behaviourally going to fit within the culture you've got. I think once you've got them, I think you got to let people. I'm a big fan of giving people some headway to kind of innovate and try stuff. And the last few years has been really difficult for people in leadership roles. Well, not everybody, but I'm talking about leadership roles. Trying to motivate staff when it's all virtual has been really challenging. So trying to create a virtual culture is something we've all had to learn. I've had to learn how you do that, and I'm still are learning. So how do you create a culture virtually is different. Whereas beforehand, you probably say, right, we can meet in the office, or we might go for some team bonding and all this kind of stuff. You just couldn't do that last few years. So I think it's different. But I think, and then you've got to have the right package. And I think, I'm a big believer you've got to work for a brand that you believe in, and you believe in the purpose that they're trying to achieve. Because I that's one of the things I look for. Want to enjoy my work and be passionate about it. And
definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So we touched on the people a little bit. I think, let's touch on tech. So you said you've actually already alluded to a few bits of this. It depends on your circumstance and like what you're trying to achieve and how quickly you want to get to market changes your mind on like what tech you're going to use, because it just depends on the circumstance. But if you could set something up, from scratch for D2C for a big brand, what tech do you see as vital, like your foundational elements, and then what bits would you add on top of that? Once you've got the kind of core in place.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's to repeat myself. It totally depends on what budgets you've got, time to market, all that kind of stuff, and whether they've got existing relationships with all the enterprise brands. But I think clearly you've got to make sure that either the tech partner or the partners can deliver the full end-to-end journey. So your front-end solution, your order management system, your call center interface, your forecasting, whatever else it might be, all the plugins that you need to put around it to run an e-commerce business. You need to make sure you've got that in place. And I think that we talked a lot about data, but clearly you need, and there's lots of different ways partners to do this, but you want good data partners that can allow you to collate your data and segment your data and allow you to leverage it effectively, whether that's a CRM provider or analytics. We use Looker at the moment for all our data, and then I think that's where you get started. And then clearly, as you evolve, we have lots of other plugins that we use for whatever it might be. But I'd kind of try and look for a partner who's got a good out of the box solution without trying to do too much customization, because then you're into cost and time. I'd probably start there. But again, it as I said, it totally depends on budgets and time frame, all that kind of stuff, and whether there's any existing relationships. But there's lots of, we used, when we moved our Irish business in-house, we used a development team in Ukraine who had their own platform, and they built us a really good e-commerce platform in 4, 5, 6 months, and it was very cheap compared to when I've worked with some of the big enterprise partners. So you don't necessarily need to spend millions and millions and millions like you maybe did a few years ago.
Yeah. Would you see that will you probably evolve off that into one of those, or do you think it'd be something that it can, you can last on that platform that's been built?
It depends on number of transactions. It depends on your turnover. It depends on, I guess, the future propositions you want to launch, and whether that tech partner has the capability to deliver on those. As a whole, how stable is the platform is. I think there's lots of different variables that I'd need to kind of look into before I can answer that question. I don't think it's a linear yes or no.
Yeah, no, of course, that makes sense.
But I think probably, if you're working for a big brand and you're scaling rapidly, you're going to need a bigger solution to cope with your volume and your transactions and whatever else it might be.
Yeah. And when it comes to you kind of trying to get everything set up in the right way, you've hopefully got the right tech, you've got the right people, and you kind of know where you're going, with what you want to achieve. But part of that is metrics, right? So what metrics should people be using for measuring success if you've got kind of a new D2C offering?
Yeah. And I think this is probably where my thinking has changed over time. So I think in years gone by, you'd look at your key levers of conversion and traffic and average order value and bounce rate. I think back to what we were discussing earlier, and one of the things that actually was one of my team came up with the idea, but we launched a customer board, because what I've seen is as e-commerce has become more mature, actually the teams have started fragmenting in corporate organizations. So you might have your performance marketing team in marketing, you might have your trading team in commercial, you might have your product team in another team, and it becomes massively siloed. And clearly customers don't shop like that. So what we launched was effectively a customer board who had a helicopter view of maybe 15 KPIs, from upper funnel to things like bounce rate and traffic, down to kind of when you're looking, then further down, you're looking at your payment gateway conversion, you're looking at fraud rates, you're looking at on-time delivery, you're looking at contact to order. And so you look at all these KPIs and basically you get that, I guess, the customer board is sponsored by the people who control that. So you might have your head of customer services, your head of call center, your head of warehouse, somebody looks after the website. It depends how siloed you are, but they're all accountable for the end-to-end journey. And I think that is so fundamental, because I always say running an e-commerce business is like putting out fires. There's always a problem somewhere. And if you've got a good data set of maybe 15 KPIs and you've got a steering board and you've got working groups underneath, you can really, really easily get on top of, oh, crikey, we've got a fraud problem, or we've got a problem here, the high bounce rate, or whatever it might be. But I think, and then the person running the team or sponsoring it can then kind of focus their efforts on the ones that are kind of red rather than green. And I think that is so fundamental. So yeah, I've shifted away from really focusing on, I guess, the traditional stuff to really looking at the full funnel. And I think it's really important because, as we've all talked about, consumer behavior has changed. There's high expectations. People are a lot less brand loyal, and having a bad returns experience can very quickly lead to a lost customer. And if you don't have the data, you won't be able to address it. So yeah, that's what I would be thinking about.
I love that. Even bad delivery experience, expectations set at 2 weeks because it's a big item and it takes 6, that's enough to make people not want to buy again. We had a brand in the office that people used to talk about a lot where their delivery windows were just so out compared to what they actually delivered in. The joke was always like, you'll get it next year. And that was what everyone then thought in the office. And to be honest, it kind of put me off buying from them. But it's such an important part of making sure every touch point with that customer is as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, I'll give you another classic example. You're spot on. Another one is the payment gateway. So when we put this in, and actually I spoke to a guy last week who's trying to address this he set his new business up, but most brands now have so many different payment providers. So you might have Google Pay, Amazon Pay, Samsung Pay, I should say that, whatever, MasterCard, Visa, and you don't get a consolidated view of the performance of all the payment gateways. And so trying to get that view is really difficult. So actually what we found was that our payment provider had really stringent fraud approvals in place, and we were rejecting 30-40% of customers for perceived fraud. But actually all it was that they haven't got the sophistication in terms of AI to kind of build the picture of Sergio as a consumer up. They'll look at you in your role now. They won't actually realize that you've got, through data, they can build a much bigger picture. So we work with another vendor, I can give them a name check, called Signified, and I'm always helping them out. And they used AI really cleverly post our payment provider, and it gave us a massive, like a 10% increase in payment approval.
Wow.
So the team has spent all that time getting traffic to the website and making the website look nice, and then you lose them all at the checkout. So I think it's just whether it's your returns example or it's my payment gateway example, or it could be your bounce rate's really high on affiliates. If you don't have that end-to-end data set, you can't drive your business. So I think that is so fundamental. And as I said, not my idea. I've nicked off one of my team, but power to him. But I think it was genius actually trying to get that kind of view in a big corporate, because it's so siloed nowadays. It's changed so much than the little team. When I started Waitrose, we were in a little team in a separate building. We were all together. Now it's most businesses, it's spread out all over the place. So
That's such a good point. And how, from a metrics perspective, how have you seen the perception of profit in e-commerce change over the years?
I think it totally depends on the culture and the business you're working within. So, I've worked in business where it's all about scale and sales, and until you get scale of sales, they don't really worry about profitability. They want to get you to 5, 6, 7, 10% of their overall business. Whereas somewhere like Thomas Cook, bless them, well, clearly, as you can imagine, we're very, very focused on profitability for obvious reasons. So again, it's very different in each business. I mean, I think and we talked about it earlier, generally, you'll set a business plan out that you want to get to 15% net profit, 15% EBIT, whatever you use. And then as the digital leader, you've got to look at your value chain and say, right, where do I want to invest my money? Do I want to invest my money on higher cost per acquisition on paid search, or do I want to offer free delivery, or actually I want to offer, better enhanced trading? And you've got to play around with that value chain and figure out what's the best way to kind of acquire and retain customers, really, and stick to your profitability. So I think I remember one of my team called it a profit tree, trying to figure out which lever to pull, and what difference does it make, So how strong do you want to make the consumer proposition? Do you offer, free warranty, et cetera, et cetera? So I think that's adapt your approach to the culture. Is it more about scale initially, or is it straight in on profit, and then working out where you best invest your money?
Yeah, exactly. It's quite interesting as well, because you can think about, initially acquiring a customer and the profits being relatively low with that, potentially. But then if you are able to reactivate them, and if it is a high ticket purchase where there's a good margin on it, like you touched on before, that slightly, it might even be an unprofitable first purchase, could turn into something that's a very profitable lifetime value from that customer. Do you think we've got the sophistication to measure that at the moment, or do you think it's still looked at quite transactional level?
I think it's to answer that question. Do we have the sophistication to work out lifetime value? Yes, if it's a business where there's lifetime value. If you're a business where the product purchases once every 4 or 5 years, then clearly you have to be around a long, long time to figure out, over 20 years, how many purchases somebody might make. If you're in a grocery business or a high volume business, then you can work that out. I think to tailor everything based on segment value, let's call it that, is quite a big decision. And generally the pressures you're under are, if you're in a PLC, you're under quarterly pressure to hit your numbers. And to say, right, I'm going to tailor my strategy to these high value customers, and I'm not going to really kind of, because they're going to be valuable, going to be valuable in the next 10, 15, whatever the time frame you're looking at is quite a difficult call, and put that into practice is quite, to be highly personalized down to a segment value and take a different view in a PLC is quite a big shout. I'd say. So I think the data is probably there, but have I worked in a place where it's, everything is tailored around segment? No, I mean, we've got loyalty programs and stuff like that, but when it comes to Black Friday, or you've got to just get out there, and yes, we might. We tried stuff whereby you invite your existing customers in first, and they get first dibs at the offers. Stuff like that says tactics, but is it fully through the full value chain or the full customer experience? No, I wouldn't. I'd be lying if I said yes.
Yeah. No, I thought it was a big sort of ask. I can imagine setting that up is very difficult, but also deciding for that to be the focus, like you say, is just such a big call.
Culturally quite challenging. Yeah, I'm sure maybe there are people doing it, but yeah.
Because it's interesting, because recently, we've seen more, I feel like it's coming up more and more in e-commerce around profit, and how profitability is a huge issue. And I think it might be because of the pandemic, commerce channel has scaled, sort of more than it would have done previously, and done a lot faster. Yes, there's been a little bit of a plateau, but generally it's stayed up pretty good. Has that now triggered teams within larger businesses to go, okay, that now needs to start making some money over there, and what does the team sort of do about that? It's interesting to see certain businesses use different in quotation marks, like older school channels of they were purely online digital native business, open a store because that's a better way to attract, cheaper way to attract traffic to their brand site. So I'm just interested to see like whether that's going to continue or not. I'm assuming that it would, and what tactics people are going to employ to try and generate more profit from each purchase.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the key thing is scale equals focus, doesn't it? As you said. So when you're small and people don't worry about it too much, and suddenly with COVID and the big shift to digital, and you get more focus because you're a bigger share of the business. So that's inevitable, and the focus on profit is inevitable. I think. I think it's different for every business, isn't it? Because it totally depends on what margins you've got and what your proposition is. But I think, as we've talked about, you've got to kind of figure out which are the best levers to pull and which are not. I think there's so much more sophistication in terms of kind of Google and so forth, where you can kind of bid by profit margin and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And you can merchandise the site by profit margin, so you can try and push your higher margin products or higher SP products. And I think then you've got to take a view as to where you invest. And we've talked about free delivery, we've talked about free returns, we've talked about you've got to look at work back from the margin target you've got to hit, and then where you want to invest. And then go from there, really. I don't think there's a single answer to that, but clearly everybody wants to make some money, and with all the inflation and other pressures going on, that's how much brands are working out how much they want to pass on the consumers or not. These are things everybody's got to figure out,
Yeah, definitely. So Nick, I think we're going to wrap it up there because that was super interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think there's a lot of insight for people to take there if they're in the middle of their DTC strategy or they're thinking about starting it. There's loads for them to take away. So really appreciate all of what you've said. Just to kind of close out, in your opinion, what are the top skills for someone who's kind of shooting to be a leader in commerce and DTC, like yourself? Like, what top skills should they think about to try and develop? What's good practice? Is it anything or anyone influenced you on that path? What's that been like? What can they look out for?
I think the important thing is you need to get experience of all the different parts of the business. And I remember when I joined Waitrose, I was given the operations team. And I'd always been a marketer, and I'd never really thought about cause and effect. Kind of run a promotion on we were running recipes at the time, 15 years ago. You never really worry about, actually, there's any stock in the warehouse in the shop floor. Yeah. So I think getting experience across different parts of the business is really important. I'm not a big person to I haven't got the attention span to read. So I actually, funny enough, I would say this because we're doing it, but I like listening to podcasts and people like that, things like that. I think that's really helpful. I find going to conferences, most people don't really give you any big insight because they're sworn to secrecy. So I struggle with getting value out of that. And I mean, the thing for me is you've got to, I learn most on the job really, and you've got to take control of your own career. So when you're in a company, if you want to do Google Squared training or whatever it might be, trying to build that into your relationship with your boss, that you build in that ability to move around and learn stuff, but also build in some, kind of external training. But you've got to take ownership. I mean, I've always been a big one of, push your own career. And if you're ambitious, don't sit there and wait for something to come to you, be network and meet people, and things will pop up. So,
brilliant.
Be a team player.
Thank you so much. Really. Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. That was so interesting. And thank you to everyone for listening. This is the Ecom Edge podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening. To hear more, subscribe to the Ecom Edge podcast today. Listen to us wherever you get your podcasts.